Welcome. Today's session will be on developing PWAs and mobile applications with Ionic, Angular, and JHipster. My name is Matt Raible. I'm a hick from the sticks. I grew up in the backwoods of Montana with no electricity, no running water. I had to walk 2 miles to the bus stop every day, and yes, it seemed like it was uphill both ways. I live in Denver, Colorado with my beautiful wife Trish and awesome kids Abby and Jack. They're teenagers, so that's interesting. I also have a middle child, my Volkswagen bus, so I have an obsession with Volkswagens. If you have a similar one, I'd love to talk to you afterwards. I'm a developer advocate for a company called Okta. I used to be an independent consultant for 20 years before that, so I've finally had a full-time job now for a whole year, and it's been great. As you might have seen in the keynote, I've been to all the DevOpses this year, so that's been a true honor and a lot of fun. And you'll be happy to know that this presentation that I'm doing today, I just finished about 6 minutes ago. So it's brand new, and it might have some glitches, but I think you'll like it. So Okta does user management in the cloud. If you need authentication for your applications, basically you can download widgets, or you can use any of our SDKs, or you can just use Spring Security and OAuth and actually talk to our APIs and authenticate that way. So today we're going to be talking about JHipster. How many people are familiar with JHipster? Okay, just a couple of you. So I have encountered this a few times, and I was going to jump right in, but I wanted to make sure you knew what JHipster was first. So JHipster is a Yeoman generator. So Yeoman is basically a way to create applications. And it's not specific to creating Java applications or Node applications or anything like that. It's just basically a framework for creating applications. And then it also promotes like a lot of testing. It promotes using like browser sync to reload your browser. And it's a really nice tool. So it generates a Spring Boot backend and an Angular front end. And it started about 3 years ago based on Julien Dubois and his experience doing this for a client. So they developed an app for a client, and then they saw, wow, this is really nice, let's extract it out and make it into a framework. And so Julien's from France, and basically how it works is you run a command and it generates an app for you, and it gives you all these choices. So you can choose between things like Maven or Gradle. You can choose between JWT authentication or OAuth 2. You can choose SQL or NoSQL. You can choose EHCache or Hazelcast. You can add Elasticsearch if you want, and you can choose between AngularJS and Angular. And we'll work on React support as well. So the cool thing about that is basically you save 2 to 3 weeks of setting up your project's infrastructure because this generates your project for you. And so I wrote a book about it. I liked it so much. I was doing a lot of work with Spring Boot on the back end and Angular on the front end. And it just seemed natural that, you know, I knew Angular and I knew Spring Boot. So I'd write a book about it, and I became basically a committer on the project because I found bugs. When you use open source projects, you typically find bugs. And so it was very easy for me to find bugs, and then I became a committer. And it's based on, you know, foundational frameworks like Spring Boot, Spring Security. It also uses Bootstrap in there. So if you want to do Angular material, I'm sorry we don't support that right now. If you want to contribute the support for that, that's great. You have to modify probably 150 templates to make that happen, so it is a bit of work. But it really does a nice job of like monitoring your application and allows you to do CRUD generation. So you can create entities like products or a blog post, you know, blogs and entities and tags and stuff like that. So pretty nice little project. And so to use JHipster, you basically install it using NPM Install. So you'll have to install Node first, and you'll need Java 8. So those are the only 2 requirements to get started. You do npm install -g because it's a global library, and then yo is for Yeoman, and I just think it's a great command name because you basically say yo, create me an app, right? That's kind of fun. So yo, and then it's generator JHipster. So there's thousands of generators out there, and they're all named generator dash something. So if you go on Yeoman's site or you search on NPM, you can search for all these different generators, and there's ones for, you know, doing Angular with the mean stack, with you know, MongoDB in the back end, and Node.js and Express. So there's all kinds of options out there. But JHipster is one of the most well-known and most popular now, especially in Java land. So then you create a directory and you cd into that directory and you just run yo JHipster. So this is very important because I think if you're coming from the Java world, you might be used to Maven archetypes. And Maven archetypes actually create the directory for you. And so Yeoman does not. And so if you run it in your home directory, for instance, and you're on a Mac or a Linux box, it's going to put a whole bunch of files right in your home directory. And some of them start with a dot, so you can't really see them. So just be aware of that, that it's, you know, create a directory, go into that directory, and then run the command. So that's the power of Yeoman, and it works really nicely for creating an app. But today we're here to talk about Ionic. And I think Ionic is interesting because Ionic allows you to basically take an Angular app and put it into an actual phone app or a native app on your phone. And you might have heard a PhoneGap was the name like 5 years ago, and that got bought by Adobe, and so that's a commercial product now. And there's also Apache Cordova. So Cordova is the free version of PhoneGap, and you basically use that with Ionic. I'm going to shut this off for the feedback. It's giving me some feedback. I'll just try to talk louder. Hello? Yeah? Better? Okay. When I do the live coding, I'm going to have to like hang it from the ceiling or something. But the cool thing about Ionic is really, it's just Angular. So if you know Angular, there might be a few new things to learn for Ionic, but I bought the Ionic 3 book, which I'll show you towards the end, and I was basically expecting it might take me, you know, a few days to read. You know, it's a few hundred pages long. It basically took me an hour. And the reason is because a lot of it is teaching you TypeScript and teaching you Angular, and I already went through the pain of learning TypeScript and Angular, and from there it's just learning how Ionic works. So really nice framework, and the thing that they're doing that I think is very cool is they're actually taking a lot of their components that are written in Angular and they're making them work as web components. So there's a new project out there called Stencil.js. So stenciljs.com is the tool that the Ionic folks have released for building web components. And if you're familiar with Angular or TypeScript, guess what? You can use that framework and it all looks very similar as far as the code and the syntax is concerned. And the reason they're doing that is because if they're web components, they don't just work with Angular, right? They can work with React, or they can work with Vue.js, and they can work with any framework. So a smart decision on their part. How many people are doing responsive web design? And how many people are doing mobile first? So just in case you don't know what the difference is, responsive web design is when you build an application, it looks great on your big monitor, and then you make it look good on a phone. The problem with that is your application might be like 2 or 3 megs of JavaScript in there, and you're downloading it on a phone, and it's really slow on the phone. Mobile first is when you make it look good on the phone first, and then you scale it up to the desktop. So if you're ever going to be on a phone, that's actually the recommended way. And they might actually be separate apps, but you know, make sure it's small and fast on a phone. So we failed on mobile. This is a quote from Alex Russell at Google's Chrome Summit last year, and it's basically because 53% of visits to mobile sites, people abandon if it takes longer than 3 seconds to load. That same study found that 53% of mobile sites take an average of 19 seconds to load. So it's a big problem. If you have a high-speed connection and you're developing for, you know, maybe enterprise customers and they all have high-speed connections, maybe not so. But if you're outside and you have a 2G or 3G connection, it's really hard. So we failed on mobile because we're all using fast laptops and our laptops are filthy liars. So the best thing to fix that is to basically implement the purple pattern. Excuse me. Get an unlock Android device, a cheap one, that's on 3G. Or use tools built in Chrome that can throttle your CPU, that can throttle your network speed. And Lighthouse is a great way to actually test that. And what I've learned from Lighthouse is it's a plugin for seeing how good your app is as a mobile app. And it actually throttles your CPU and it throttles your network for you. That's why it tests it. So if anyone was at Josh and I's talk yesterday, one of the things I posted after is I deployed our app to Cloud Foundry, and I found that the performance wasn't good. The reason the performance wasn't good is because I was calling the Giphy API to get images, and even though I was only rendering one image, I was fetching 25. And each of those images, you can't specify dimensions, so you actually get images that are up to 500K each. So even though the app is pretty fast and efficient locally, it's all about the data. And images are one of the worst problems on the internet as far as really clogging up the pipe. So that's a great way to do it. The purple pattern is push critical resources for the initial route, render the initial route, pre-cache remaining routes, and lazy load and create remaining routes on demand. So this basically became the foundation for progressive web apps. Progressive web apps are basically web apps that you can install, and they will work offline. So on Chrome, there's ways of actually prompting you to install it as an app. Same thing on Android, and it's coming to iOS. Apple just started this summer actually adding support for service workers to iOS. And service workers are basically, it's a specification and allows you to do caching in the background of your network requests. So I wrote an article on progressive web apps on the developer blog on Okta. So if you want to read more about it, it kind of talks about the framework support that's out there and ways of implementing it in your apps. But it's not specific to any framework. It's just having a manifest file that specifies icons and a start page, and then it's about having service worker support, which isn't particular to a framework. You can just do it with a simple JavaScript file, and then having it on HTTPS. So those are the 3 requirements. So to do this talk, I started with the CFP, right? I went and did some conference-driven development and said, I really want to integrate Ionic with JHipster. So I'm going to go ahead and submit a talk that requires me to do that. So you can see here it says, it or I will show you how you can easily generate Ionic UIs and describe the pain points of working with Node and Yeoman to develop this module. So I started about a month ago, October 10th, and started looking into creating Ionic for JHipster. So where do you start when you want to learn how to do something? Stack Overflow. Right? So I went to Stack Overflow, and I said, hey, I'm looking to create an Ionic app generator for JHipster similar to Ignite JHipster. So Ignite JHipster, if you're familiar with React Native, Ignite is a framework for React Native that makes it very easy to create templates for a new project. And so Ignite JHipster basically allows you to start up a new React Native project, and it'll connect to a JHipster backend and allow you to generate entities. So that was my goal. I wanted to create a new Ionic app and have it integrate with JHipster, and then I wanted to generate CRUD, right, for the entities that we're generating. So that's what I came into this whole talk, and that's why I submitted it, hopefully be able to do. So this question sat out there for a whole day and no advice. No one really knew what to do, so I actually followed this guy from Ionic on Twitter. And so I sent him a direct message, and I was like, hey, I want to create, a template for JHipster apps Ionic. How do I do that? And he sent back a reply that seemed pretty easy, right? Ionic start, and then point to your GitHub repository. So I tried that. Didn't work. So I emailed the JHipster team. I said, hey guys, I want to do an Ionic module for JHipster. I submitted a talk to DevOps Morocco to showcase it. So I searched on the web, found some stuff, asked a question on Stack Overflow. Ionic does have a marketplace, so it's similar. They do seem to have seed apps. Do you guys know how I might do this? Then I'll generate a couple pages, right? Give them a good demo. Should be fun. I realize I'm a fast typer, so I got a screenshot when the slides are published that shows you the email. One of the things I did through this whole process is I recorded a lot of video. So there's a new feature that's been added to JHipster that's pretty cool. You can create modules. They have this module support where you can add functionality to JHipster. So they have this blueprint module. So you can basically create a new module, let's say for React or for Vue.js, and it'll actually override the templates for the client. So if you did that when you generate a new app, it'll actually take and use those templates instead of the ones for Angular, for instance. So Great feature, but the problem is I wanted to create a new app. I didn't want to have it in an existing JHipster app. And so it didn't really work for me. So the thing I did this morning was, instead of telling you the story and showing you a bunch of screenshots and like animated GIFs, is I made a video about everything I did. So like I said, I started by emailing the JHipster team. I'll show you that again. This is about a 5-minute video, and I'll kind of talk the way through it, and then I'll tell you about the pain points, and then once we're done, I'll actually try a demo and hope it works. So I emailed them, didn't really get, much response from them. I make a lot of typos when I type. So then Deepu advised to use the blueprints, a couple days later, and I was like, sweet, that'll be great. Tried it, it didn't work. Notice the date, November 2nd. Right? It's like a week before DevOps Belgium. I got to get going. And so I went to work creating a JHipster module, not using the blueprint feature, and was able to run, Yo JHipster Ionic, so a whole new module. Prompts you where do you want to install it, enter the directory where your JHipster app is located, and I got it working. So I made this video where I create a backend with JHipster, has a JHipster server instead of a full-on JHipster app. You can see it prompts you for the different options. Even for different languages. So it saves that. And then I run my new one that creates an actual application. So Yo JHipster-Ionic. And it prompts you similarly, do you want to name your application and where is your JHipster application located? And then it runs that Ionic start command to actually generate, their starter, which is called super. And so after it runs, one of the things it prompts you to do is enable CORS, cross-origin resource sharing, on your JHipster app, so you can talk to it from a different port. So I go into, Spring Boot configuration, and it's commented out by default, so I just enable it. And then I specify just where it is on the actual browser. So localhost 8100 is what they use when you're developing Ionic just in your browser before you deploy it to like an emulator. And then you run Ionic serve to actually start it up. So this is a video I published to YouTube shortly after doing it. So again, Thursday, November 2nd. I leave on Monday to go to DevOps Belgium. You can see, so I want to show that you can authenticate, right? That's my goal here. It's connecting to the back end. So admin, or user, and it actually works. So I'm like, hey, I'm on my way. Things are looking good. And then I discovered after DevOps Belgium, I was just going to finish the module up before I came here, that super starter upgraded Angular over the weekend, Angular 5. Broke all my code. But I was still like, I work for Okta, and I wanted to get OAuth working to show you, hey, you can use OAuth with this stuff. Because OAuth works with JHipster, we have Keycloak support. So you can do Docker Compose, you can start up Keycloak. And so I went, got that all running. You can see this is Sunday night, right? I'm already here in Morocco. And I discovered that the WebView engine that Ionic uses doesn't support cookies. So that's how we do it in JHipster. We set cookies on the back end. So that was a kind of a deal breaker, right? I was like, okay, enough with OAuth. I got JWT working. I'm just going to stick with JWT. And then I realized that starter versioning issue is a big problem, so I had to write my own starter. So this is Monday afternoon. I started rewriting a starter as they do it. And so instead of invoking their command that does Ionic start, I wrote my own starter and basically got it published in their directory so you can run Ionic start and point to the starter that I created. So I had to upgrade it to Angular 5 because they were on Angular 5. So I spent Monday afternoon doing that, and it was great. I felt like I was making big progress. And then I discovered, I was like, I really want to put this into an actual emulator, right? Let's see how this works. So I get it up and running in the emulator. I got Spring Boot running on the back end on port 8080, and the emulator says can't connect because of cross-origin resource sharing. And I'm like, I enabled it, what's going on? And again, it was that WK WebKit view window that they recently switched from UI view. It didn't allow cores over HTTPS, or over HTTP, only HTTPS. So I searched all around, and I found all these bugs about it, tried all these workarounds. I basically lost 3 hours on Monday afternoon trying to get that working. Turns out when you have the emulator running, guess what port it runs on? 8080. So the emulator is trying to connect to Spring Boot that's on 8080. But the whole time I thought it was HTTPS that was my problem. So I'm in the hotel trying to upload everything, or create new apps and upload them like Cloud Foundry and Heroku so I can run them on HTTPS. I tried locally, right, and I couldn't get it to trust like the local SSL certificate. So I tried to upload them. Everything's failing. Slow internet. Can't get it up there. So I actually used my site, SSH'd into RaibleDesigns.com, started creating JHipster apps on there, and almost had it working, but then the front-end Maven plugin for Node failed. So I'm back to, square one. And so I was like, oh my God, this is going to fail. I can't even do this, right? Can't do the talk. But then I realized that I tried curl, and I tried, calling 8080, and the server header that came back was from Ionic instead of from Spring Boot. So I changed Spring Boot's port to 9000. Boom, everything worked. It didn't have anything to do with HTTPS. So I was like, whew, that's good. And then basically, I started the entity generator, and I thought blueprints would work again. So this is Monday night. Didn't work, so I was up at 2 trying to make that happen. And then yesterday, Josh and I had our talk, right? And so I was busy all day with that. And last night I went to dinner with some friends, came home about 9, and I was like, I got to get the entity generator working enough so I can show a demo. And so I worked until 4 on that last night. And this morning I wake up at 8, and I'm like, I got to make sure everything works, write my talk, and then I'll go and do it. And I get a call from downstairs. It's like, hey, can you come to the keynote? We got a surprise for you. Right? It was the DevOps Champion Award. I was like, I can, but I really need to finish my presentation. So I showed up, and then I made that video in the lobby and finished these slides right before it. And I think all the code's going to work. So yeah, it's been a fun adventure. So let's try this demo. I don't know how the audio is going to work and if it's going to show up on the video, but I'll just leave the mic on the table and hopefully it'll work. So we'll close that down, and then if I forget to mirror, which I will do, if I'm talking and you're supposed to be seeing code, let me know, because I forget to mirror and unmirror every once in a while. And yeah, I'll be talking. You won't be seeing anything. So we'll bump the fonts up a little. So basically there's an end goal and there's how things work right now, because I made some changes to the starter and those haven't got pushed through as a PR yet. So everything I'm about to show you will work probably in the next couple days. But there's even code on my laptop that I haven't even committed yet. So if my laptop and my hard drive actually dies, I lose lots of work. So I plan to commit it shortly after this. But there's 2 ways to start. Basically, you'll be able to use JHipster Ionic eventually, and it'll prompt you for the application name. But right now, how I'm going to do it is show you how you could do it. So Ionic start, and then you'll name your app, and then you'll do Okta developer JHipster. So that's the starter that's out there. That's the one I created. And it'll look up the starter, and since it's registered, it'll go out and download it. This is the risky part of any live demo, is hoping the internet works. So looks like it's working. It's downloading, extracting that. Kind of slow, but it's working. And then it's going to create an app with everything in there. And so at the same time, I'll go ahead and create the back end. So make that one a bit bigger. Back end. And this will be our JHipster app. So rather than just doing a back end, it's nice to have JHipster with a UI, because that's my goal with this. Is I wrote an app for this book, and I basically want to put a mobile app on top of it. So you can still use a web UI, but on a mobile phone it'd be nice to use a mobile app. So we're going to see into the back end here, and then we'll run JHipster. So NPM Install is always the longest part. If you think that Maven or Gradle is bad because it downloads the internet, like NPM downloads the internet and all its friends. It says, come to the party, let's go. So here's what JHipster looks like. We're basically going to create just a monolithic application, but you can also create microservices if you want. We'll just call it Backend. Default package name. It remembers my last settings. That's just a feature of Yeoman. That's why it's populated that with com.octa.developer. I wish I could move it up some. Here, let's try that. So people in the back can see it. And then, do you want to use JHipster Registry? Nope. We're only supporting, or this module only supports JWT authentication right now. And the reason is because the other two are cookie-based, right? And that doesn't work, like I said. I'm just going to use a SQL database. I like Postgres in production. For development, I'm going to use H2. And then you can use EHCache or Hazelcast. I'm going to just choose the default because that's all I've tested it with. Maven or Gradle. How many people like Maven? How many people like Raible? Wow, only 2. It varies. Different places I go. At Java 1, it was all Maven. In Denver, at the Denver Jug, it was all Gradle. So Maven has colored logging now, right? That's kind of cool. So we'll just do Maven. And then you can choose social login if you want. You can use Elasticsearch or WebSockets. All those are built in. You can even use Kafka. And then we'll do Angular 4. SAS will just take the defaults of no. Internationalization will take English and Arabic. And then we're not going to do any testing things because they take a while to download. So it basically creates a whole bunch of files for me, right? Mostly TypeScript because of Angular 4. And also because Spring Boot has done a great job of making CRUD very easy in Java and Spring Data. On the front end, you still have to have lots of files, right, to do all your management. And I think if we built CRUD into our JavaScript frameworks, then they'd be huge, right? So you don't want that. You want to just build whatever you need. So that's going to take a bit to download. And then up here, we got Ionic on, so we can say, do we want to install the free Ionic app? Nope. And so then it's going to commit this for us, which we've started doing in JHipster as well. The reason we do that is hopefully you have Git on your machine, because what's going to happen is then we're going to change stuff. So it's nice to know when a generator changed things, right? When it changed your files for you. So by committing to Git right after you run it, then basically you have all that good to go. So I have a backup here because this one might take a while. So I'll go into CD, Backend Backup, and just run Maven from here. So this backup that I got working this morning, and the only difference between the one I'm running over here is it actually already has core set up, right, cross origin resource sharing. So it's got those settings commented out. And it's also got one entity generated in it. So as soon as it's done running, okay, so that one's good to go. This one's good to go. And I can show you the app now. See, there's create Ionic presentation breakfast and make movie. I didn't really get to. So, kind of hungry. Localhost 8080. And here's a basic JHipster app. So we can sign in as admin. And you can see there's a whole bunch of features, user management. It's got metrics built in so you can see like the performance of your application, whether the caches are being hit. It's also got health checks for disk space and database, and configuration for Spring, so you can see what all your Spring settings are. You can also see auditing. I've been logging in a lot. And logging, so you can actually tweak the log. So if you want to go in here and say, hey, Spring Framework, I want to make that into info, you can tweak that and it happens on the fly. So that's a feature of logback. And then if you wanted to like change your settings, or actually change your password, all that stuff's like built in. So I did create one product. You'll see I put it in there, and I can create another one that says like milk. And once this is done, I'll show you how I actually created that. It's pretty easy. But back here we have this, this starter that I ran with. So there's some bugs I discovered this morning. So this one that we're downloading from Ionic isn't quite up to snuff. There's just a few tweaks I had to make. So what I have is a different one in this starters project off GitHub. And you can see there's my branch. And so I have this build JHSH. And what that does is it builds that starter locally with my tweaks in there. Maybe. Okay. So now I can go in here and CD into this one, and in here I can do Ionic serve. And so Ionic's pretty smart. It says, hey, looks like a fresh checkout. You haven't run NPM install. Would you like me to do that for you? So yes. If you don't run NPM install, you don't have any dependencies, nothing's going to work. And they won't let you actually run it, so it's a good idea to do that. And so eventually this starter will have that Ionic Generator in it by default. And so you won't have to do anything that I'm about to do. What I'm about to do is use NPM link. If you're familiar with doing anything with NPM or JHipster or generators, how it works is in a normal project with Maven and Java, you can actually clone the project, right? Check it out from GitHub, and then you can run an NPM install, and it's in your local repository, and then you change the version number, point to it, and you can use that library, right, that you just built. Well, with NPM, how it works is you go into the directory, and then you do an NPM link, and then it's available, you know, on your operating system by that name if you ever type any commands. If you're already in a project, you might have to do NPM link and then the name of it. So like Generator, JHipster, Ionic. Any questions? I got t-shirts if you have a question. Trade you. You ask a question, I give you a t-shirt. I got a lot of them too. Some people when I do that, they're just like, can I have a t-shirt? And at first I was like, that's not a real question, but now I got so many I don't want to take them home. I think that's valid. I'll let it pass.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I have a t-shirt?
All right. JHipster.
Thank you.
We had them made just for this conference and the one in Belgium. I had to actually bring 100 of them over because I was able to get them printed cheaper in the US, like by $500, but then I had to haul 2 suitcases. And all my clothes are in my backpack, so I didn't even need a suitcase, but I had to haul 2 suitcases all the way over. So you can see this is up and running. I should be able to sign in now. Admin. Okay, so it's working, and I can go to entities. There aren't any entities here. As far as settings are concerned, these are some settings you can tweak. I haven't done anything here, but I think eventually this will be like the password settings or the username settings you saw. So let's see if we can make the generator work. So bump that up a little. So this was in Dev Starters build. And then, like I said, NPM link, just because I haven't published the generator yet, so generator-jhipster-ionic. So that's pointing to my local instance now. And I can run yo JHipster, Ionic, entity. Moment of truth here. This is the first mistake you'll make when running the entity generator. You'll be like, yeah, I just run that, it's going to prompt me. What's the name, right? But it doesn't. It blows up. It's taking a little while to blow up, but it blows up with a long stack trace that basically says, hey, you forgot to specify a name. So maybe it doesn't like that this one's running down here. Usually it blows up a little faster. I won't wait for it to blow up. I'll cancel. Try to cancel. Okay, there, it finally blew up. So you did not provide required argument name, right? But it'd be nice to suppress all that stack trace. But oh well. We'll do product just like the back end has. So it says, do you want to clone or use this entity from an existing app? I'll be daring and I'll say yes. It says, you know, is it in that directory? I'll say nope. It'll eventually be when that finishes, but right now, we just have backend.backup. So it found the JHipster product JSON that I generated for the back end. It says, do you want to regenerate it for the front end? Yep. So we'll overwrite those files just because it does modify some files. And then you can see on the other side here, it's updating. This doesn't always work. Sometimes you actually have to stop and restart it. So if it works the first time, that'll be great. I love demos that work the first time. The only reason we're getting some imports here is because I haven't filled in all of it. I just wanted to show you like the basics. So Now if we click entities, you'll see it didn't quite work. All right, so back here, we'll just try restarting it. And if that doesn't work, then I go to the one I already made work, and then you'll be like, wow, he's just got to write a little more code. So over here, that one should work. This copying's finished. So usually when you generate code with JHipster, you do probably want to restart everything. So it's usually a good idea rather than just relying on things to work. So you can see now we have this product here. If we click on product, it says no products found. But it's also giving us a warning about 8100. So on the back end, I did tweak that, but we'll try it anyway. So create a new product. And this is one thing that I've seen with Ionic. I'm actually doing a modal here. You'll see if I have DevTools open, it's not a modal. If I close it, it is a modal. All right, so we'll say, let's add some bread. It's probably going to give me that same error. So this is actually one of the problems. I had this as a progressive web app, and progressive web apps get stuck in your browser. Right? So by clearing out the application, maybe it'll work this time. So we'll try products. Shouldn't have to sign in again. This has been some weird things that have been happening. Try that. So now we're getting them, right? I just had to clear my cache, so it's one of the problems of progressive web apps. They stick in your browser, right? Because I was practicing this beforehand. So now we have bread and milk, right? Same as our back end here. We can add a new one on the back end that's like, what else? Maybe steak for dinner. Put that in there, and then on the front end we can refresh. And we're getting that. So even here we can say, okay, well I want to add something new, like just some bottled water. And it actually adds that, and then in the back end you can refresh. And it's added it there too. Yeah.
Do we need to refresh in every time when changing the backend? There's no real time?
We're not using WebSockets, no. You can, but we're not in Ionic right now. Right. So then, here you can also delete, right, like that, and it actually deletes it and deletes on the back end. So that's the basic features of the whole setup. This is actually still running over here, so I'm glad I didn't use that. That's just one of the issues with JHipster, is it can take a while to make that work with the NPM install. Not that one. So hey, I'm glad it worked. So to install JHipster for Ionic, you'll eventually be able to do npm install -g JHipster Ionic, and then you'll be able to create an Ionic application with JHipster. One of the problems I've seen there is Ionic has a good way of doing it. When they do Ionic start, it actually will prompt you if there's an existing directory and then delete it. And I haven't found a way to interact with their starter and actually capture the commands back from that. So if you just use this way, where you do Ionic start, then that'll work as well. So basically there's going to be two ways, where there's a shorter way or there's a longer way. And then you can, eventually you won't need the second step, which is adding the JHipster Ionic module. And you'll be able to generate entities. So if you have any feedback on things you would like to add, I would say you can do it on Stack Overflow and just put JHipster as a tag, and I'll get notifications for it, as well as the rest of the team. As well as you can DM me on Twitter at Raible. All my direct messages are open, so I'll get those, or you can email me as well. So I wrote a few other tutorials about how to do Ionic development with Spring Boot in particular. This is one where it shows you, similar to the demo that Josh and I did yesterday, where we had a list of cars and then we displayed images from those cars. That is a project that shows you how to do that, and then I actually developed a mobile app with it. And if we have time here, I think this is supposed to end in 5 minutes. Is that correct? Yeah? So I will try to run it in an emulator. Let's see how many more slides I have. If you want to learn Ionic, this is a great book for it. I think it's funny that it's called Building Mobile Apps with Ionic 2, and then they crossed it out and said 3. Shortcut to becoming an Ionic expert, you just got to try it. Like most things, if you're coding in it, then you'll probably learn it pretty well. There's a bunch more resources on JHipster, jhipster.tech. as well as I have a couple YouTube videos out there on how to get started with it. And then how to do microservices with JHipster and deploy it to Google Cloud with Kubernetes. So that was kind of fun, and it does take a while. So watching a video that does it in 15 minutes is nicer than watching me do it for 45 minutes. And if you want help, one of the mistakes that people make is they post questions in the issues for JHipster, and that's meant for issues. It's not meant for questions. So do it on Stack Overflow. Everyone on the team will get notifications. And there's also a chat channel on Gitter if you want to use that. If you want to contribute and help out on the project, you can do that with our contributing guide. And if you want to see what all the developers are talking about, there's a JHipster Dev mailing list as well. And so if you download the PDF that I will upload onto SpeakerDeck after this, all these links will be clickable. If you do it on SpeakerDeck, they're not going to be clickable because all they capture is left and right. So you do have to download the PDF to make them clickable. What's new and next in JHipster? We have start.jhipster.tech. If you're familiar with start.spring.io, it's very similar. What you do is you create a new project, and it actually creates it on GitHub for you. So you don't download anything. It just creates it on GitHub, and then you can clone it. There's a new version of the JHipster Registry that's out. We're working on Spring Boot 2 and Spring Webflux support, and we're working on the React support. I added support for both Keycloak and Okta, but it'll work with any identity provider like Google or Facebook as well. We just leverage Spring Security for that. And so Spring Security handles like the redirect to the identity provider, comes back to your app. The cool thing about that is you can have 16 or 20 JHipster apps. They all talk to the same identity provider. You don't have to create users for each one of those apps, so it works pretty nice. And then at the bottom there, there's a slide share on the overview and roadmap for JHipster for the rest of this year. I write a lot of tutorials on developer.okta.com/blog. Some of them have to do with authentication. A lot of them don't. So I'm just showing you how to use Angular in Spring Boot or Ionic in Spring Boot. So I'd encourage you to check that out. And I keep them up to date. So I've already updated some of them that I wrote back in April for Angular 5. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask now, as well as hit me up on my website or hit me up on Twitter. And like I said, I'll deploy this to SpeakerDeck. And all the code is on Okta Developer. And so I don't think we have time. I'll try it, since we do have a couple minutes, is to show you what it looks like to open it up in an emulator. So you can do Ionic, Cordova, run, or emulate iOS. But remember, this isn't actually going to work. The reason it's not going to work is because I didn't change the port to 9000 on the back end. But hopefully you'll just see what it looks like when it pops up in an emulator. You can also, if you plug your phone in, you can run it. So you do Ionic Cordova run iOS, and it'll deploy it right to your phone. And they have a new tool that allows you to do continuous development where you change something in your code and it refreshes it on the phone. So that's a pretty cool feature. If you're using Android, same thing, supports Android as well. So one of the big pushes that Ionic is trying to do is actually allow you to develop with HTML5 and Angular and deploy it to either platform and not have to write it twice for both of them. Does anyone have any questions?
You didn't talk about manifest today, but is there any tooling support or generator support for creating manifest?
Right, so I didn't talk much about PWAs with Ionic just because I was frustrated with it, right? But it generates all that by default. So JHipster and Ionic basically have in their index.html the service worker support, and all you have to do is comment it out, or uncomment it. It's commented out by default. Ionic already has the manifest. JHipster already has a manifest. JHipster has one more step where you have to go into one of the Webpack files and actually uncomment another line. But all that's documented in the README when you generate the application. So both of them have full PWA support. You just have to tweak one thing. Anyone else? Okay, well, I got probably 20 t-shirts. I also have some books. So the JHipster mini book is available online. If you Google for the name, JHipster mini book. Version 4 is on InfoQ. You can get it for free. So you can download a PDF, a Mobi, an EPUB. Read it on your Kindle if you want, or read it on your desktop. You can also buy it if you want, but not many people do. But I like to bring it and hand some out. So I got a few of those. There's a bunch of JHipster stickers up here. Come grab some of those, and then I'll pull out the t-shirts and set them over there.
Who's behind all
So the beauty of JHipster is it has 300 contributors and not a single company that actually provides support for it. So if you want support, I'll sell you a contract, right? But basically there's a company called Epon that Julien Dubois works for in Paris, and they sponsor a lot of people to work on it. They bring trainees in and they train them, and they have them contribute code to JHipster, and then they go do work at clients. But there's not really, it's not like Red Hat supporting Keycloak. It's basically very community driven, and we don't really have a company like driving our direction or anything. We do have a lot of contributors from companies, like Ray Sang, contributor our Kubernetes support. We have InfiniSpan support from Red Hat, so there's a lot of people doing a lot of work, but there's no one company that does it all. And my company pays me to work on it as well, so it's a pretty cool project. Anyone else? How do you convince your decision makers to use it? I don't know if you actually have to, because one of the beauties of JHipster is it's a great learning tool. When I was an independent consultant, I did Spring Boot and Angular development for many years in consulting, and I tried to get people to use it in the sense of, hey, you can hire me as a consultant and I'm kind of expensive, or you can just use JHipster and you do everything that I'm going to tell you to do, and they would still hire me, but I'd just copy and paste code out of JHipster. Right? So it's tough because how many apps are you developing from scratch? Not that many, right? Usually you're doing like legacy development. So if you can't start new apps with it, I would encourage you to generate applications with it and kind of look how things are done or look how the code's written. Anyone else? Okay, well, I'll pull out some t-shirts and thank you for coming.